Many years had passed since that summer, but I could still remember the nervousness I felt whenever I thought about asking Aunt Jean for a favor I had never dared to mention to anyone else. I was 15 then, spending part of my summer vacation at her house. I had always been especially close to Aunt Jean. She was patient, approachable, and somehow easier to talk to than my mother. Since my cousin Sally had left for college, the house felt unusually quiet, and I began wondering whether this might be the one opportunity one would ever have to tell Aunt Jean about something I had kept secret for years. I had always been fascinated by girls' clothing. Sometimes, when nobody was around, I had secretly tried on things belonging to my mother or sister. The experience brought an odd mixture of excitement, comfort, embarrassment, and guilt. I didn't understand why I felt this way, and because I had never spoken about it, I had no idea whether there was anything unusual about me. One afternoon, I finally gathered enough courage. "Aunt Jean, can I ask you something? And will you promise not to laugh?" She looked up with a smile. "Have I ever laughed at one of your questions?" That gave me just enough courage to continue. "I've wondered what it would be like to dress as a girl. Not as a joke. I mean really try it for a while. I've always wanted to know how it would feel." Her expression became thoughtful rather than amused. "Why do you think you want to do that?" "I don't really know," I admitted. "I like girls, and I don't think I'm confused about that. Sometimes I wish I could experience things from the other side. I want to know what it feels like." Aunt Jean was quiet for a moment. "Well," she finally said, "if you're serious, perhaps we can make this a little experiment. But it won't simply be putting on a dress for an afternoon. If you're going to explore this, we should do it thoughtfully and privately." I nodded eagerly. She smiled. "Then we'll need a name." "A name?" "Yes. If you're going to try imagining yourself differently, you need something that feels separate from Billy." She considered several possibilities before saying, "Cindy." The name sounded strangely natural. "All right," I said. "Cindy." And just like that, my secret summer experiment began. Aunt Jean helped me choose some of Sally's old clothes that were appropriate for my size. She showed me how different outfits were put together and patiently taught me little things I had never paid attention to before. Nothing felt quite as mysterious once someone was willing to explain it without judgment. The strangest part wasn't the clothes themselves. It was seeing my reflection afterward. For the first time, I wasn't simply a boy secretly borrowing somebody else's clothing. I was deliberately exploring another side of myself, with someone I trusted standing beside me. Aunt Jean studied my expression in the mirror. "Well, Cindy," she said with a laugh, "what do you think?" I stared at my reflection for a long moment. I answered slowly, "I finally understand why I've always been curious." She nodded. "That's what curiosity is for. You don't always have to know the answer before you ask the question." That summer didn't magically explain everything about me. It didn't turn me into someone else, either. But it gave me something I had never had before: permission to be honest about a part of myself without immediately feeling ashamed. And perhaps that was the real lesson of my summer with Aunt Jean. I hadn't gone there expecting to discover a different person. I had gone there hoping to understand myself a little better. The memory of that summer stayed with me for years. I had arrived at Aunt Jean's house expecting an ordinary visit, but somewhere along the way I found myself standing at the beginning of an experience I had secretly imagined for as long as I could remember. Aunt Jean had always been different from the other adults in my family. She listened instead of immediately judging, and I could talk to her about things I wouldn't have dared mention to anyone else. With Sally away at college, there was plenty of time for the two of us to ourselves. After admitting how curious I was about wearing girls' clothes, I expected Aunt Jean to laugh. Instead, she became thoughtful. "If you're going to explore this," she told me, "then let's do it properly. You shouldn't feel ashamed simply because you're curious." She helped me choose some of Sally's old clothes and began teaching me how different outfits could change the way I looked and carried myself. She even suggested that, for the duration of the experiment, I should use a different name. "Cindy," she said. I repeated it quietly. "Cindy." Somehow, hearing the name made the whole thing feel more real. Over the next several days, Aunt Jean introduced me to a world I had previously known only from a distance. She showed me how to coordinate outfits, arrange my hair, apply simple makeup, and move more confidently in clothes that felt completely unfamiliar. She treated the whole thing almost like a lesson. "Don't worry about getting everything right immediately," she said. "Nobody learns something new without practice." I spent hours looking at myself in the mirror. Sometimes I laughed because the person staring back at me looked so different from the boy who had arrived at her house. Other times I simply stood there, trying to understand why the experience felt so important to me. Aunt Jean encouraged me to practice walking naturally, sitting comfortably, and carrying myself with confidence. She explained that clothing could influence the way a person felt, but that confidence ultimately came from within. "You don't have to become somebody else," she reminded me. "You're still you. You're simply exploring a side of yourself you've kept hidden." That idea stayed with me. Each morning brought another outfit and another opportunity to learn. I began taking greater care with my appearance. I discovered that I actually enjoyed choosing clothes, arranging accessories, and experimenting with different hairstyles. Aunt Jean also gave me ordinary household responsibilities. She wanted me to understand that pretending to be a girl wasn't simply about wearing a dress. It was about experiencing a different routine and seeing how I responded to it. By the middle of the week, something unexpected had happened. I had stopped feeling embarrassed every time I looked in the mirror. Instead, I had begun to feel comfortable. I was still Billy underneath it all, of course. But Cindy had become more than a costume or a name. She represented a part of me that I had never previously allowed myself to acknowledge. On Saturday evening, Aunt Jean announced that we were going out together. "Think of it as the final test," she said. She helped me select an outfit, arrange my hair, and finish the look with a few carefully chosen accessories. When I finally stood in front of the full-length mirror, I hardly recognized myself. I wasn't suddenly a different person. But I looked confident. For the first time, I wasn't hiding in a bedroom or hurriedly changing clothes because I was afraid someone might discover my secret. I was standing beside someone I trusted, and I wasn't ashamed. Aunt Jean smiled when she saw my expression. "Ready, Cindy?" I took one last look at myself in the mirror. "Ready." We walked outside together and climbed into the car. As we drove through town, my nervousness gradually faded. I didn't know where this experiment would eventually lead me. I didn't know whether my fascination with feminine clothing would last for months, years, or only that summer. But I knew something important had changed. For the first time, I had been given permission to explore a part of myself without fear. And that was what made the summer I became Cindy so unforgettable.